What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy here. We're from Mtg. We like, oh, you're so cute, Bubba. We like the magic, in case you didn't know. And today, fun little experiment for you, sort of. We're going to run through a bunch of these decks that are registered for Mythic Championship V. Now, full disclosure, they're wrapping up day 1 as I record this. Not sure quite what's going through to day 2 or how that's going to work yet, but I still want to go through a bunch of these decks regardless of what happens between now and tomorrow, because a lot of these decks are either really, really cool or really powerful. So today, we're going to go through not only the decks that I think have a real chance of taking the whole thing home this weekend, but also some fun little dark horse candidates that were only registered by a player or two. So let's go ahead and get to it, starting with GOLGARI Adventure here. Not necessarily a dark horse, but of all the decks that were registered for this tournament in large numbers, this one was registered in the least numbers. I guess we'll put it that way. Between all the various Golos builds, SIMIC midrange and BANT midrange, often with Golos, all the various Fires decks, often with Golos, all of those, there's a bunch of redundant lists that are basically the same starting 60 in every one. GOLGARI Adventure is a deck kind of like that, but it didn't get registered anywhere near as much as the Golos decks. So let's take a quick look at this one. This one's by Canister. But, again, I should tell you that most of the GOLGARI Adventure decks follow the same basic starting 60 cards. You got your Edgewall Innkeeper, which is, subtly, not so subtly, not really a well-kept secret, the best card in the entire deck. The card advantage this gets you in the mid-game is ridiculous because you're going to be casting the adventure half of a lot of creatures, your Foulmire Knights occasionally, your Murderous Riders very often, your Order of Night very often. So by the time you actually, get to turn 5 or turn 6 or even turn 4, some of the time you'll be able to cast like 2 creatures out of exile. And draw 2 cards, and later on in the game, you'll get 3 cards in the same turn, and that kind of card advantage engine for such a relatively low starting investment is just really busted, and this is actually one of the more repulsive cards in Standard, and if it didn't exist, this deck wouldn't exist, but the same is true of a lot of these other cards. Murderous Rider is just like one of the best cards in Standard, bar none right now. Oh, you can't go up there, Bubba. Well, I guess you could. I mean, what are you really hurting if you do? But I guess we'll see. We'll give it a shot. You can roam freely, Ziggy. He's going to hurt the microphone. But in any case, you've also got Lovestruck Beast in here as basically the biggest creature in the deck. Really tough hurdle for a lot of decks to get past if you get it on turn 3. But you got Paradise Druid as well as Questing Beast in here as kind of a secondary plan. You're going to be dealing a fair amount of damage in the early game, even if you don't deal a bunch of damage in the early game. Things like Questing Beasts and Rankle on turn 3 are really good plays that are going to put your opponent on the back foot, let you start turning the corners, setting things up. And while your opponent's dealing with Questing Beast or Rankle, then you can start getting value off of Edgewall Innkeeper by casting any cards that are in exile. It's just a pretty sick deck. And you've also got help from Nissa, who shakes the world, to just out mid-range people. Same thing with Vivien Arcbow Ranger. Given multiple turns, Vivien is actually just like really gross because she's going to make all your relatively small creatures bigger or just your big creatures even bigger and give them trample. And giving a Lovestruck Beast trample is really important against a lot of decks right now, including Field of the Dead decks, where you're just trying to get through in the turns where they're making, 1 to 2 zombies a turn for the first few turns that they're producing zombies. It'll take a few turns before they get like 20 zombies, right? So, in those first couple of turns, you can use Questing Beast, Rankle to fly over any zombies that might exist, and then obviously Vivien will give all your big creatures trample to get through that wall of zombies. So that's important. You can also grab creatures from the sideboard. She's a removal piece, so she kind of frees up some space in the deck where you would otherwise be playing removal. Just Vivien is actually a gross card, and I usually see Vivien in these like monogreen stompy lists, and she's very, very good there, but she's just as good in these lists. Hello, Bubba. You're so cute, but she's very good in these lists too for just getting through guys and breaking stalemates and stuff because Standard can get kind of sloggy right now. Even if you're not facing a Golos or Field of the Dead deck, there's a lot of mid-rangey action slogs going on right now, just wars of attrition, and Vivien's a really good way of breaking those. She can get cards out of the sideboard too, but there's not really much in that area. You got a Cavalier of Night, Crawl Harpooners for taking out big flyers, Massacre Girl for a sweeper option, Thrashing Brontodon to take out Fires of Invention or Cavalcade of Calamity or whatever, whenever you need to. Aside from that, Veil of Summer's obvious, Noxious Grasp is obvious, Legion's End, mostly against the Field of the Dead decks as well, but also this is good against aggro. Davriel, really interesting sideboard option against not only Field of the Dead decks, but a bunch of other stuff right now that's just trying to go long, so really like the inclusion of that. And then obviously Ashiok. Almost any deck that has Ashiok is going to play her in the sideboard right now against those field decks. And other decks that go really long, really easy to deck them and keep them from getting options back out of their side or out of their graveyard. So I really like the way this deck is constructed. I like the early game options of Edgewall Innkeeper, Falmar Knight, or Innkeeper, Falmar Knight, to stick to the ground and try to clear up any early other big threats on the other side of the table, keep them from swinging in, or just as a card advantage piece. It's really have liked Falmar Knight and all the sort of mono black decks that I've built this season, so not a surprise to see it here. You needed to enable Lovestruck Beast anyway, but between these two guys, these two 1-drops, it really helps you have an actual board presence in the early game, and then sort of, transition into Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, Rankle, all that in the slightly later game, just a turn or two later. So I really like a lot of what this deck is doing. It can put its foot on the gas and stay there for the entire game. It just really has a plan at almost any point during the game. This Order of Midnight is really nice for getting back anything that's hit the graveyard, whether it's Edgewall Innkeepers or Lovestruck Beast or something. It doesn't really work with Murderous Rider, but that's okay. Sometimes just using Order of Midnight to get a Questing Beast or a Rankle back is going to be the game right there. So I think this is a very well-built deck, and it's not exactly what I imagine we'd all think the green-black adventure deck would end up looking like, but this is the one that got registered the most. Exactly this starting 60 along with these 24 lands. So as far as other Golgari adventure builds, though, where's Ashley at? Let's see, Ashley Munoz with this Golgari adventure list. This looks really interesting to me, too. See, what she's done here is she's gone Legion's End, Assassin's Trophy, Once Upon a Time, instead of these Planeswalkers, like Nissa and Vivian. This is one of the only real changes that she made. There's a Massacre Girl, I can't say her name, Massacre Girl, in the main deck here, which I think is an interesting pick. Because there's ways that you can, get rid of all the zombies on the table with one Massacre Girl, or just kill all the creatures in mono red or something, or mono black if there's any mono black decks registered. And I think there might be exactly 1 or 0. Aside from that, I think this is a really interesting meta call. But as far as not playing the Planeswalkers and playing these spells instead, if you're gaming for Golos specifically, then Assassin's Trophy and Legion's End are really, really good picks. And Once Upon a Time is just a card that I assume you'd want to play, at all times. She's also gone down 1 land, which I think is really interesting considering she's still playing Questing Beast Rankle, but the fact that she's not playing a 4-drop Planeswalker and a 5-drop Planeswalker probably does help her cut that land along with all 4 Once Upon a Time. And usually, just to my mind, as a Magic player, I like any time you can cut a land. I love that. So, because again, Standard is a slog right now, and you're not going to get all the card advantage even in the world, even with Edgewall Innkeeper. So that said, you really don't want to draw blanks in the late game while you're trying to establish advantage over your opponent in these wars of attrition. So I really like the idea of cutting as many lands as you can, and that's what Ashley's done here. Now, my favorite of all of these, where is Takeshi? There he is. Takeshi Senu has this Golgari adventure list that actually plays Lucky Clover and 20 lands, and that is super cool. I'm playing a deck very similar to this on Arena right now, and it's my favorite deck to play right now. It's Black and White Knights that plays Lucky Clover and Smitten Swordmaster. And because you have Lucky Clover out, you can Smitten Swordmaster sometimes if you have multiple copies of Clover. You can Smitten Swordmaster for 12, 15. It's just a shotgun blast that will end the game immediately, especially if you had any early presence. And it's really easy for this deck to do that. Instead of going black-white the way I did, it's gone green-black, which is really smart because you get Edgewall Innkeeper to actually draw you cards, which is what the Black-White Knight deck needs the most. So if you go green-black, you get Edgewall Innkeeper, and you get to play Falmar Knight still, Murderous Rider still, so you're able to still get some advantage in real cards off of playing adventure stuff. And I like that idea. But you also get Black Lance Paragon. He's playing 1 copy of Flaxen Intruder here. interesting tech, but I'm not sure that it's the tech that you want to be on. But I guess we'll have to see by the end of the event. I just cut that and go with 4 Knight of the Ebon Legion, but I'm not the professional, right? But, Midnight Reaper is also good for the card advantage. Order of Midnight is insane in this deck because with Lucky Clover out, especially again if you have more than one Lucky Clover, then Order of Midnight is just unbelievable card advantage. You rip it off the top of your library on turn 8, and suddenly you're getting your entire graveyard back. If you have like 2 Lucky Clovers out, you get 3 cards out of it. Then you can build your board again, Smitten Swordmaster for 12. I mean, game over. It's just ridiculous what Order of Midnight can do in this build specifically. So if I have a favorite, or a top 3 builds from today, I'd say this is probably number 3 in Dev's favorite builds for Mythic Championship 5. I've been trying to make Lucky Clover and Smitten Swordmaster work for a while now, and this looks like an interesting way of doing it by incorporating Innkeeper to actually get card advantage. I think that's really interesting. Hope Takeshi does well. But as far as some other decks that are really cool that I want to look at, there's Caleb Durwald's Jund list. And I think I mentioned this briefly the other day in the Jund Deck Tech, although I may have cut that part in editing. But I'm not sure. That deck tech was getting really long by the time I ended up finishing up editing. But even if I did not cut that part, I'll say it here again that Caleb's list is really interesting to me. When I built Jund, I went land destruction to kill, basically to destroy Field of the Dead, right? But he's done something much more sort of straightforward, more linear, I guess, here. But I think it's a strategy that's going to end up paying off because most of these creatures in this deck have some form of card advantage on them, like Growth Chamber Guardian or Rixmati Reveler, both really interesting, calls for early game plays, because again, Standard is a slog right now. So again, Wars of Attrition are kind of the name of the game in a lot of situations. Games are going to go long. That's just a fact of life. So cards like Rixmati Reveler, which represent 3 drawn cards, on turn 5 or 4 is really good. Growth Chamber Guardian, which will go get extra copies of itself, be a huge creature. This has come back a little bit more in the arena meta, at least in my experience in the last few days. And this can be a very difficult card to take care of. And I think we all forgot that for a time. Bonecrusher Giant's in the deck too. This is just one of the best cards in Standard. Along with GRUUL Spellbreaker to get just really good value on turn 3. You can go turn 2 Bonecrusher, kill that guy. Turn 3 Bonecrusher. Or you can go turn 3 GRUUL Spellbreaker. And that's crazy. Or you can go turn 3 Rotting Regisaur. So the deck just has an unbelievable play on turn 3 that's overstated for that point in the game. No matter what. So just crazy as far as making sure that you hit the board hard and you hit the board taller than your opponent and faster too. And aside from that, you've got Questing Beast in here to help finish games off. Skargan Hellkite. Questing Beast and Skargan Hellkite are a really good combination, a really good turn sequence against a deck like Field of the Dead, because none of their creatures can block Questing Beast because all the zombies have 2 powers, so they just can't block Questing Beast. So you drop Questing Beast on turn 4 in this deck. There's no Paradise Druid here, which is a little surprising, but I guess he wanted to just really get fat dudes on the board as quickly as possible to pressure as much as he could. So that makes sense. But, you go Questing Beast on turn 4, hit him for 4. Turn 5, Hasted Skargan Hellkite, hit him for 8 that turn. So that's 12 damage in all. And if you've got a Rotting Regisaur or, Growth Chamber Guardian, Bonecrusher Giant, whatever, aside from all of that, it's whatever you did on the first 3 turns of the game is also dealing damage to them. So it's very likely that's going to be the death blow. So Skargan Hellkite, along with Sarkhan, have been both, 5-mana red cards that have come along in recent days, really in the last week or so, to sort of combat Field of the Dead, and they both do it very, very well. Haste on Hellkite, Haste on Questing Beast. That is a turn sequence that's just unbelievable. So a lot of these GRUUL aggro decks are doing that, but they're incorporating Paradise Druid to do it faster. So you see a little bit of that in this deck too, but mostly it's just big creatures that often generate some sort of advantage. Again, Growth Chamber Guardian, Rixmati Reveler, Bonecrusher Giant, all of these generate advantage. GRUUL Spellbreaker, just overstated, can have haste, yet another important card. You see Zerta Goblin in a lot of these. Or Zerta Raider, I forget what it's called. The 2-mana 2/2, we'll get to it, with Riot. And that is another way of just like putting your opponent on the back foot as quickly as possible, dealing damage as quickly as you can, and making sure that you add up to 20 before they can make any zombies. And hasty stuff like Zerdog Goblin, GRUUL Spellbreaker, Questing Beast, Skargan Hellkite are sort of the secret to a deck like this. But you've got pump spells like Collision Colossus, which are insane with a card like Questing Beast. You get through for all the damage at the same time. And Embercleave, which is another secret to the deck. It's kind of the best card in this deck. And one of the reasons to play, so many creatures, 29. You want to be attacking with as many creatures as you can, so you can actually play Embercleave on a relatively early turn, 4 or 5 if you're trying to do that. So Embercleave can just close out games super fast, and it's a freaking crazy card. So I'm surprised to see one copy of that. And then Legion's End is the only real removal in the deck at all. You're mostly hoping to go over the top of other aggro decks, so you don't need removal that much. Legion's End is mostly in there for when you do need to hit the panic button on a small creature, or a creature that's getting a lot of advantage, and especially zombie tokens. I mean, most of the time when you see Legion's End, that's going to be the explanation for it. But there's also 24 lands in here. Oh, and a Shifting Ceratops I didn't get to, which is an interesting call right now in a sort of Oko, sometimes Teferi meta to have a card like this that can just swing directly through and kill the Oko. Or just swing through and kill them. So Shifting Ceratops, an interesting call in a deck that needed probably one more 4-drop anyway. But moving on, let's find my favorite deck. That was number 2, by the way, on Dev's favorite decks list. Here it is, RAKDOS Sacrifice by Miguel de Cruz Simoes. I think I probably butchered your name. This deck is only $178, which makes it probably the cheapest deck of the format, or at least one of them, or of the tournament. And this is very similar to the deck that I played on camera the other day that we went 5-0 with, the RAKDOS Aristocats deck, which is basically just Cauldron Familiar, and where are you at? Witch's Oven right there, which if you're familiar with the channel and with a lot of other YouTube channels at this point, you probably know this basic combo. But we're also using, Mayhem Devil in this, and it's just Mayhem Devil is so good in this deck specifically, and almost no other deck, because when you sacrifice Cauldron Familiar to the Witch's Oven, you'll get a ping off of Mayhem Devil, and then when you sacrifice the food to bring the Cauldron Familiar back, you get another ping. So you're actually, in that video I said you're doubling the pings from Cauldron Familiar, you're actually tripling them, and that just makes the game go much, much faster. Plus you've got other fast creatures like Gutterbones, Judith in there, to where when you sacrifice Cauldron Familiar, you deal even more damage. So it's just Knight of the Ebon Legion is another small creature to get on board quickly, deal damage quickly, so that when you actually start, using Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven and stuff, you're just like, it's a form of reach. Rather than just having that carry you through the entire game, you actually try to deal damage in the early game, and then just use this as your, your burn. In a burn deck or a mono red aggro deck, you want to deal a bunch of damage with your creatures on the ground in the early game, and then draw that Skewer the Critics or something to finish the game off. That's basically the same concept here, is that you're using Cauldron Familiar as a reach in your aggro deck, along with, Mayhem Devil, Midnight Reaper to draw you a bunch of cards when you are doing the combo, and just when you're running creatures into combat, because they're pumped up by Judith or something. Then when they die, you'll draw cards from Midnight Reaper that'll make you more likely to get more Witch's Ovens. And so it's just, the whole deck is crazy. Your one Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, mostly to go with Priest of the Forgotten Gods, but also to go with Mayhem Devil. I'm surprised there aren't more copies of Chandra in the deck, but I guess the deck doesn't want to get too heavy on 3-drops. That said, Chandra's just crazy because you're guaranteed to deal 2 damage per turn per Mayhem Devil. So if you have 2 out, you'll deal 4 when you sacrifice these tokens at the end of the turn, because you have to sacrifice them. They don't just die. You sacrifice them. So that's just an insane combo right there. Plus, obviously, Chandra and Priest is insane too. You just make 2 elementals every turn, sacrifice them, make your opponent sacrifice a thing, get 2 black mana, draw cards. Just, ooh. There's so many little combos in this deck that are awesome. It's got a great removal package too, like Angrass Rampage, Bedevil, Legion's End, and slick card right here, Claim the Firstborn. This is one of the best cards when I was playing the deck, because you can just steal one of your opponent's early creatures and then sack it to Witch's Oven. Like, no questions asked. It's just absolutely ridiculous some of the plays you can make with Claim the Firstborn. So, love this card in this deck, and it's particularly disgusting, even if you don't have an Oven out, because you can just, on an early turn sequence, you can get Knight of the Ebon Legion and a Gutterbones and their, their 3-drop or whatever, and just swing in on them and deal a bunch of damage, you know? So Claim the Firstborn's been crazy. Now, this deck still plays 24 lands, even though it looks relatively low curve-wise. You know, it doesn't play any, like, 4-drops or anything like that. But that said, it is a hungry deck. You know, you're trying to spend a lot of mana to do a lot of things on a lot of turns. You got to have Gutter Bones back and all that. You got to have, excuse me, extra mana to do a bunch of the things in this deck, and there's going to be a lot of turns where you want to double or even triple spell. So the deck is a lot hungrier than you might think it is, but I really, really like this thing, like an awful lot, and I hope that it does a lot of work at the tournament this weekend. It has my heart and my #1 slot for coolest deck going into this tournament. But as far as decks that could win this tournament, let's start looking at those real quick. You know, your typical, let's see, what's a good one to start with? Let's go with Bant Golos here, because a lot of these decks are relatively similar without too many changes. Now, you've probably seen a lot of these decks before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You know, you've got, hey buddy, you've got all your Golos in here to go along with, where are you? The stupid Field of the Dead that will probably be banned on Monday morning, but we'll have to wait and see about that. You know, you've got Once Upon a Time to help you find Field of the Dead, and Golos if you're trying to find that at any given time, and or Realm Cloak Giant. You know, Once Upon a Time is crazy in this deck. Planar Cleansing has snuck its way into this build, but not every single build. Growth Spiral, Circuitous Route, you know, obvious, or Arboreal Grazer, Beanstalk Giant. All of this is pretty rote at this point, and it's not like, what's the word I want to use? Because it's not like super creative. It just, like, it is what it is. We know this is the best deck. Agent of Treachery and Kenrith the Return King at one point were really neat, cool pieces of, like, tech in the deck. You know, after the first week they started getting old because, like, they're very, very annoying cards. You know, like Kenrith can give a bunch of zombies haste, and that's disgusting. Give a Beanstalk Giant trample some of the time, too. Just all the abilities on this thing are gross. So I think we all have had about enough of this at this point. Not to say that they should ban Field of the Dead, but that's a topic for discussion tomorrow. I want to do a video about what should and should not be banned, because I have opinions like I always do. But aside from that, there's also this SIMIC midrange deck. This one registered by Reed Duke, who is a totally awesome dude. It's also $563, which is a lot of money. You know, you want to play good cards in Standard, the best cards in Standard. That's how it is, you know. Where are you, buddy? 4 Oko Thief of Crowns. This also has a chance of being banned on Monday, but I really, really, really doubt it. Although I'll save it. I'll save it for the video I want to do about the banned announcement tomorrow. But in any case, this is a very, very, very repulsive, disgusting, repugnant Magic card in Standard right now, and it's a bit toxic, I think. And I don't think that's a super controversial opinion. I mean, this is the main reason that most people are on this deck this weekend is Oko, but you obviously get stuff like Nissa in here to go with the 4 Hydroid Krasis. You know, just SIMIC is a ridiculous color combination right now. And we're in the kind of meta where, like, you don't really have to have creature removal, so long as you have the best plays on any given turn, and so long as you have Oko too. You don't really need creature removal. Like, you've got a thing that gains you life every turn if that's what you want to pump mana into, and you got a thing that makes a creature every other turn. You know, it makes a food, and the next turn it makes a creature, so that'll block for you. When you play it, it's got 6 loyalty the turn you play it most of the time, so I mean, it can't be attacked into early, really, you know, to kill it at least. On the turn after you play it, so it's just really repressive against, you know, or oppressive against aggro decks. I guess you could say repressive too. But it's a gross card, and it's the centerpiece of the deck. But I mean, you get other gross cards like Hydroid Krasis, Nissa, Questing Beast. Where you at, buddy? You know, Leafkin Druid, Paradise Druid, and a Marleaf Pixie in this build to help set it off. You know, this will fly over field decks when it's no longer a relevant mana ramp piece. And I do like that about it. I think it's a cool call, but, you know, basically you've got 4 in all mana ramping dudes on turn 2, and then Gilded Goose on turn 1 to make sure that you could actually get to, like, Nissa by turn 3, which is still a disgusting play. You can go Oko on turn 2 into Wicked Wolf, which is really, that's a gross play too, and very, again, oppressive towards the aggro decks in the format. So, God, just every deck every card the deck plays is disgusting. Once Upon a Time, again, one of the best cards in Standard. A lot of decks are playing all 4 of this. As a matter of fact, should point this out, Once Upon a Time is the most played card of the tournament. by far, if I remember correctly. But I know for a fact it is the most played card at the tournament this weekend. Now, Disdainful Stroke, a really interesting call. It's not going to counter those Okos, those occasional Teferis and stuff, but it will counter Goloses, Fires of Invention, a bunch of the other cards that Fires of Invention is trying to play, Circuitous Route, and a bunch of the other cards that the, both Simic Food decks and the Golos decks are trying to play. It'll counter Hydroid Crasises in the mirror match. It'll counter Questing Beasts in the mirror match, as well as Rankles occasionally. I mean, there's just literally a billion reasons to play Disdainful Stroke right now, and I think it's a very interesting metagame call. And this is not the only deck in which this card is being played. If I'm not mistaken, let's see, yeah, Reed Duke, yeah, I believe all the Channel Fireball guys, or players in general, I shouldn't say guys, but all the Channel Fireball players are on 4 copies of Disdainful Stroke in Simic Food. So, yeah, I want to see how well that plays out over the weekend. Really interesting call. But, if there's one bit of evolution that comes to that deck this weekend, it's that, and I want to see how it works out. But let's look at another Golos deck. Let's look at this Golos Fires deck. We're wrapping up here soon, honestly. This one, a lot cheaper, $324, but that's because I'm not sure that, Fires of Invention is the best way to build this deck right now. I think that Fires is crazy. I'm going to put you on the floor for now, Ziggy. I'm sorry, buddy. But I'm not sure that Fires is the best way to build this deck, and I'm not sure it's the best card, but I do think Fires is gross. I just think it's really easy to metagame against, and if too many players expect it, there's a million ways that you can get them off of Fires of Invention and just take them off of their turn 4 play or whatever. Not even just their turn 4 play, but like the whole way their deck is built. Some of these people will play, there it is, Fae of Wishes, and if you have Fae of Wishes and no Fires of Invention, Fae of Wishes is still good, but it's nowhere near as good. So you're stuck with a bad, relatively, not mediocre, but not anywhere near as good card as if you did have, so you stuck your Fires. This one only plays 2 Deafening Clarion. Sometimes you'll see 4, as much as 4. Circuitous Route, which is a really interesting play with Fires of Invention, because you can just Fires on your 4th turn, you get a free Circuitous Route immediately, which is very, very disgusting. This version plays Solar Blaze, which is creeping into the deck more and more often now, especially considering most creatures that you care about will kill themselves off of Solar Blaze. It's not bad. Beanstalk Giant, Arboreal Grazer, along with Circuitous Route, just all the basic ramp stuff to go along with Hydroid Crasis, Golos, 1 Kenrith in the deck. I mean, it's all starting to look very familiar at this point. Deja vu all over again, but at the same time, I do like some of the steps the deck is taking, because the Fires of Invention and Fae of Wishes playing is just more fun. It's just a lot more fun. It is, Ziggy. It is. Come on, Bubba. Can you jump up? Yeah. Hey, Bubba. But the Fires of Invention and Fae of Wishes playing is just a lot more fun than your average, Golos deck, your Bant Golos, or your 4-color Golos, or whatever. So I support it, but I'm not sure that it's like the strongest way to do it, and ultimately I'm not really sure how much I like these Golos decks in the first place. So that said, let's look at some other stuff. Hey, Bubba. Hey, Bubba. Come on. Yeah, he's back. I'm sorry I kicked you off of me. You're so mad. But let's look at this GRUUL Aggro by Brianna Lee Tan here. You're going to knock my coffee over. This one's $281. Not a terrible price for a standard deck, but not the best either. But this is a deck that I see popping up on Arena an awful lot. There's the Zertog Goblin I was referring to earlier. The only Planeswalkers in this version of the deck, at least, are Domri. But sometimes you'll see the 4-mana Vivian in here, and sometimes you'll even see Nissa. But this one is a lot lower on the curve, and I really, really like that idea, You've got Bone Crusher Giant. It's just a card that basically generates a lot of card advantage. You've got GRUUL Spellbreaker in here as just another huge haste dude. Pelt Collector to get big fast. Questing Bees, huge haste dude. Robber the Rich, hasty guy. Skargan Hellkite, hasty guys. Hasty guy. All right, buddy. That's it. You gotta get off the desk. I tried to let you be on the desk, but you can't do it. You're not responsible. Anyway, you're not responsible for your actions. You're a cat. You don't know what you're doing. But in any case, I really like the extreme presence of hasty creatures in this deck, and a bunch of other creatures that are just way above curve, along with Domri as a sort of removal and ramp piece at the same time that also anthems your guys. Perfect deck for Domri. Plus Collision Colossus to give those Questing Beasts and Skargan Hellkites a huge bonus. Domri's Ambush as a piece of removal. It also makes your creatures bigger. Embercleave, the same reason we saw it in the Jund deck. Just because you're playing, a fair amount of creatures in the deck. You're going to be playing one almost every turn if you curve out correctly. And you can play Embercleave relatively early and just crush, you know. 2 Once Upon a Time, because they wanted to play 23 lands, and they really didn't want to go above or below 23 or above 2 as far as Once Upon a Time goes. But, you know, if you can make room for it, you make room for some number of it. I really like this deck. That's the reason I'm covering it here before we finish up. I got one more I want to talk about, and then we're done. But, you know, I really like the way this deck is working right now. I think it's probably the best of the aggro decks in the field. Not necessarily the most pure. It does have some mid-range plan, but not really much. It's very, very low curve, very aggressive, almost entirely dedicated to haste, and I really like that build of a deck at the moment. So I want to see how well this one does over the weekend too. But let me find the final deck that I want to look at here. It's gonna take just a second because I have to pick through a haystack full of Bant Goloses and the word Golos in general, and find the needle. So let's go over to page 2. Maybe it's on page 2. Now, let's see. Oh, there's a Jeskai Fires deck. I could talk about that. Now, here it is. There are a couple of Mardu Knights decks that are registered. I think that's really cool, but I want to talk about this Mono Red Cavalcade deck before we get out of here, because this deck is $68.50 right now. This is easily, by far, the cheapest deck registered all weekend. You see that low price? $36 to play a Mythic Championship V deck right here. And I like that this one, even though it's dedicated to Cavalcade, it's not dedicated to terrible creatures. You know, it still gets to play, it still wants to play Bone Crusher Giant, it still wants to play Rimrock Knight, Runaway Steamkin, you know, like, you don't see these in every Cavalcade build. You'll see, like, Ginger Brute and Weaselback Captain, or whatever it's called, which is in one of these Mardu Knights builds, by the way, by Eric Froelich. I believe it's in his build. And why would you register Weaselback Captain in your Mythic Championship deck? But I guess if you're trying to go really low, maybe. But I don't get it, especially if you're not playing Cavalcade. But you all right, buddy? You okay? You can't be on the desk. We've established you can't be on the desk. I'll pet you. I'll pet you all night. But, you know, this deck still plays Cavalcade, but does not let that, you know, make it play bad creatures. And I really love that. You still have to play 10th Street Dodger, which isn't the best creature in the world, but it's pretty decent in Cavalcade, especially when you got your Torbrand out, because it's like a guaranteed 6 damage, effectively, in most games at least, you know. You'll have a Cavalcade down, you'll swing in with a Torbrand out with a 10th Street Dodger, you'll deal 3 damage just off the Cavalcade trigger, and then 10th Street will deal 3 damage when it gets through unblocked. So really good reach there, and I understand why you'd still put that in. Same thing with Scourge Spitter, you know, guaranteed 3 damage when you have Torbrand and Cavalcade out. The combos are too good to ignore, but rather than play stuff like, you know, Chandra Spitfire, they were like, we're just going to play Bone Crusher and Rimrock and Runaway, because these are just objectively better cards than either Chandra Spitfire or the cards that this deck would normally resort to playing. So if of all the Cavalcade decks, I really like the way this one is built an awful lot. You know, it plays Tybalt in here to keep off, you know, the life gain in the format right now. There's a fair amount of problematic life gain going on at the moment. So I like the idea of main deck Tybalt. And they went all the way with 3 here, which is interesting because this deck doesn't want to play too many 3-drops. But it's still worth doing this to keep your opponent off of Hydroid Krasis, gaining them life and just keeping them back in the game and all that. Food right now, very important, obviously. So Tybalt might be an awesome main deck call. Note that they are not playing Skewer the Critics, just Light Up the Stage. Now, you do want to play Light Up the Stage. I think it is the more important card. But rather than play Skewer, they just want to play a bunch of creatures that work with Cavalcade and a bunch of creatures that don't. You know, just crash through for damage. You know, why get 2 damage off of Cavalcade triggering and a creature getting 3 for 1 when I could get 4 damage off of Bone Crusher getting in for 4, you know? Why would I waste my time doing that? So I really like some of the decisions made in this deck, right down to the still keeping Calamity and cutting Skewer. I think it's really, really cool. And Castle Embereth in the deck, which is awesome in these decks. You know, you send your creatures in, you get all your Cavalcade triggers, and then you activate Castle Embereth and you just kill them. So just a really cool deck. You know, Experimental Frenzy made the sideboard here. Lava Coil sideboard, Legion Warboss sideboard, Shock sideboard, which is another card you'd normally see main decked in a lot of these lists. But, you know, there's just not a whole lot of early game creatures you want to kill. There's not a ton of, like, Risen Reefs in this that are registered to this tournament. There are, because, you know, Simic Midrange is a thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a huge thing, but you're not trying to kill a bunch of other aggro creatures for the most part. He's one of the only pure aggro decks registered to the tournament. So I just really like the direction he took with that. But that's all the decks I want to look at for now. I hope I gave you a good idea of not only what decks are very good this time around, but and have the highest chance of winning. We looked at those, but also some of my dark horse candidates and some of the funkier stuff in the mix. So hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, thumbs up this content, you know, put it in more recommended feeds. Support the channel by subscribing. It's the easiest way to support the channel, but you can also check out TCG Player, first link in the description to all these deck lists that we talked about today. You want to pick any of them up, especially the super cheap Mono Red Calamity build, I would understand. So first link in the description for all your picking deck up needs. Go over to TCG Player, and if you really want to help out around here, then just consider checking out the Patreon. Link in the description, or patreon.com/SBMTG. $1 a month helps you or lets you pick what content we do around here every day. And yeah, so not too much to ask. $1 a month, I think I'm worth that. I put in work. But anyway, I think I'm done for now, unless you want to follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. You could do that, but I think I gotta get out of here because, you know, SmackDown's going to start super soon. So I will catch you cats. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.